Hello, this is Irv Shapiro with MakeWithTech. And today, I have 3 different hammers here. Now, these 3 hammers all do the same thing. They pound things. They hammer things. Whether you're hammering a nail into a block of wood or you're breaking concrete, hammers hammer. Likewise, when using a 3D printer, you also need tools. And the software tool that you'll use the most often is called a slicer. A slicer takes a 3-dimensional object and it slices it into individual layers that you can print on a 3D printer. Because a 3D printer in many ways is fundamentally a 2-dimensional object. It draws or extrudes a line of filament and moves up, extrudes another line. Now, you might ask, why would you ever want to use more than one slicer? And there are 3 that I use fairly often. Well, you also might want to ask, why would you want to use more than one hammer? Well, if you don't want to mar a surface and you just want to force something in, you'd use a rubber hammer. You'd use a steel hammer with some weight if you're driving nails. And if you're finishing up a picture frame with very small brads, perhaps you use a smaller hammer. Today, we're going to talk about some of the advantages and disadvantages, not a complete review, but a comparison between Cura, the Prusa Slicer, and IdeaMaker. So stay tuned and let's learn something together. Now, if you've watched the MakeWithTech channel before, you already know that we help people learn how to create, innovate, make things. Make things by using inexpensive desktop technology. A lot of 3D printing, a little bit of electronics, a little bit of software engineering, a bit of woodworking. What you may not already know is that MakeWithTech is more than just a YouTube channel. It's also a discussion forum, a place for people to go to share ideas, to share pictures, to discuss the things they're making. That's at forum.makewithtech.com. And what's newest in the family of MakeWithTech tools is a software program that allows you to search for 3-dimensional models that you want to resize, convert, adjust, that you want to customize because it has a working Thingiverse style customizer. So if you enjoy learning about making things, please subscribe to the channel, click on the bell, and like the channel because YouTube likes it when people like channels. Now let's talk about slicers. We're going to begin by looking at a diagram, at a chart, talking about some standard features that slicers have, and quickly compare Cura, PrusaSlicer, and IdeaMaker. Now, for everyday use, for general 3D printing, without specific requirements, these slicers all do the same job. They all work equally well, and the quality for many prints will be indistinguishable. The speed of printing a print sliced, a model sliced with these 3 slicers does vary a bit, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Now, before we compare these slicers, let's talk about their roots a bit, their origins. Cura is a slicer that's completely open source. That means you can go to GitHub, you can go to a directory of software, a place that programmers get software. You can download a copy and you can change it, you can modify it, you can use it however you want. It's sponsored by Ultimaker. Ultimaker makes high-end, professional-grade 3D printers that sell for thousands of dollars. PrusaSlicer is made by Prusa, and it was initially a customized version of Slick 3R, a slicer that competed with Cura that was tuned to work precisely with Prusa printers. Still today, if you have a Prusa printer, the PrusaSlicer does the best job of any software product you can use for converting a three-dimensional model into slices or layers, because it's highly optimized. Prusa makes the hardware, they make the firmware, that's the software inside the printer, and they have a team working on PrusaSlicer. IdeaMaker is a proprietary slicer. You cannot download the source code like you can for PrusaSlicer or Cura, and it's maintained and supported by Raise3d. Raise3d makes professional and industrial grade 3D printers, and the majority of them have multiple extruders. So they're able to print multiple colors at the same time. But for industrial applications, it's not printing multiple colors that's really important. It's the ability to print dissolvable filaments that can be used for supports. So this print was printed on a JGMaker Artist D IDEX, independent dual extruder 3D printer. And I used dissolvable supports, which you can't see because I put this in a pail of warm water when I was done. I shook it around for a bit, let it sit, and all of the supports that were holding up these features dissolved, allowing me to get a very precise print without having to manually cut off lots of supports. Now, let's look at the screen and look at the characteristics that are common across these three printers. They all support profiles, allowing you to use them with a range of printers. They all support the ability to fine-tune the slicing process for different materials, for different filaments. They all work across the common desktop and laptop computers. They all have a layer view, but in layer view, they start to differentiate. The IdeaMaker layer view is the least precise, and it's not quite as beautiful on the screen. Cura has a good layer view, we'll look at it. Prusa has the best, and we'll show you that in the demonstration. They all allow you to tune many of the parameters you need to tune for good quality prints. All of them support the ability to print objects with independent dual extruder printers. However, IdeaMaker does it best. A relatively new feature in slicers is the ability to use adaptive layers, to change the layer heights slightly throughout the print to improve quality and, more importantly, to improve speed. All of them support that feature. But that feature is newest in Cura. It's still in beta. Now, a feature that I find useful is the ability to change your start code based on conditions. And the ability to do conditional start code is only available today in PrusaSlicer and IdeaMaker, not in Cura. Now let's talk for a moment about print speed. Cura is the slowest. Now that's not really a problem because you get excellent consistent quality across the widest range of 3D printers. And Cura by far supports more models of 3D printers than either of the other slicers. ImageMaker is somewhere in the middle, but very often when you tune up ImageMaker to print faster, you lose quality. And we're going to compare the quality in detail in just a moment. Prusa, I find, is about somewhere between 10 and 30% faster for the same print when printing the same model than Cura. Now let's talk about quality a bit more. So these three rocket ships, and I'll show you a close-up of these, were printed on the three slicers. They were all printed in vase mode, which is called spiralized mode, on Cura. The Prusa and the Cura models are almost indistinguishable. I think at the very top, the Prusa model, the Prusa print, was a little better. But unfortunately, the ImageMaker print, even after I attempted to tune it a bit, was quite a bit rougher, and I'll show you a close-up of that. Across the board, I found the quality of a printer with a well-tuned profile. That means set up with optimal parameters between Cura and Prusa is very similar. I do believe Prusa has a few more options, more sophisticated options for tuning quality, and you'll often see a new feature in Prusa, then followed on by that same feature in Cura a few months later. With that said, what slicer do I use almost every day? And that's Cura. And the reason is I do reviews of lots of different printers. I think I have 13 3D printers sitting here in the MakeWithTech lab. And the majority of them come with Cura. And because they come with Cura, I use it most often. And so I'm most familiar with it. And most people will find that whatever slicer they use most often, they're most comfortable with. And most of the time, the majority of the time, it doesn't matter. Okay, now let's actually go to the slicers, and I'll show you on screen some of the unique features of each slicer to help you better evaluate when you would use Cura, PrusaSlicer, or IdeaMaker. Okay, here on the screen I have the Cura Slicer, a recent version loaded. And this was what it will look like when you first turn it on if you've never used it before. You will have to select a printer. And if you haven't selected a printer before, you'll have to click on Add Printer. And here's the first way that Cura is different. Look at all of the different printers that are available. And there are even more printers available that aren't listed in the drop-down, where you get a profile, a setup from the manufacturer themselves. So I have the Flsun Super Racer selected. And the reason is it's the fastest printer I have in my shop, and therefore I like to use it for producing demo pieces because I can do them more quickly. So let's look at some of the basics with Cura, and these basics apply to all of the slicers, but you use them differently. First, we're going to switch out of this sort of simplified mode by clicking on Custom here. And now you'll see in Cura, and Cura does this in some ways better than the other slicers because it puts all of the parameters you might want to change in these little drop downs. But often when you look at a demo of Cura being given by someone, you'll see things that you don't see on your screen. And the reason is you have to click on this little hamburger menu, and I'm going to select all. And then you have access to all of the parameters. Now, when I'm looking at an individual parameter, you'll see there's a pop-up here with a large help screen. That's not a built-in capability of Cura. That's added with a plugin, and we're going to cover plugins in just a moment. So let me take and make this a little bit smaller, and I'm going to load in a model just to give you an idea of the process. If you're not familiar with this, and if you already are, maybe you haven't seen Cura before, and I'm going to click on Slice. Now this is converting from a three-dimensional object to a series of layers. And once I click on Slice, it will give me the time to slice it. If I hover over this little eye, I'll see the time for the individual features, for the components of the print. So you'll see here that the infill is 24% of the time. Now to see how the times of the individual components vary, let's go to infill and change it from 15% to 50%. And we'll reslice our model. And you'll see now it's going to take about twice as long. We'll hover over the eye and we'll see infill has gone up to 43% of our print time. So that's a valuable tool you'll use in these slicers for tuning your settings. Once you've sliced the model, you can click on Preview, and you can see how the model will look in 3 dimensions. And you can see here the colors indicate the individual components. So blue are supports that were added by the slicer. If I click up here, I can make the parameters go away. I can move down to a lower layer, and now we can turn on a side, and here you can see the actual infill with the outer wall and the inner wall and supports. So those are some of the basic capabilities. The unique capability of Cura is this Marketplace. So if I click on Marketplace here, and it does take, it's not broken, it does take like a real minute. Waiting 60 seconds is a long time when you're waiting. We're going to cut out a little bit of that time. And now it's back, and you can see all of the different add-ons. These are called plugins you can add to make Cura even more powerful. The plugin that I showed you on the screen was called the Settings Guide. Click on one of these, select the option to install it, and you're ready to go. So Cura is my go-to slicer because it supports the widest number of printers. It's very easy to use, and because I use it a lot, I'm very comfortable with all of the parameters. Let's go to the next slicer. This is the Prusa Slicer. Now the Prusa Slicer is configured quite differently, and I'll show that to you in a minute, but let's first load a model. And we're going to load the same astronaut fill model from the MatterHacker folks. And the first thing you'll notice is the clarity of the screen. The display subsystem, the visuals in PrusaSlicer are just spectacular. They're really the best of any slicer I've used. You have the same capabilities to rotate models around, to look at them, and you have a layer view. And the PrusaSlicer immediately slices your models as soon as you make a change. So you generally will not have to click a slice button. I'm going to click on this layer preview over here. And now I can scroll down. I can rotate this around, and we can see the layers of this model. Now you'll see the infill is very different because the default infill is a complex three-dimensional infill using the PrusaSlicer. But we can see outer walls, inner walls, and in this particular case, I had supports off. So you can't see any individual supports. Now, if I wanted to change that infill, I need to go over here to Print Settings. And you'll see the way Prusa is set up is you have categories across the top and then details along the side. So I can go to Infill, and let's change this to a grid infill, which is more similar to what we saw in Cura. Go back here to my platter. It's already resliced. I can rotate down, and now we'll see a grid infill. So the PrusaSlicer is organized differently, but it fundamentally does the same things, including a very elaborate display over here on the side, which tells you the amount of time for the different characteristics. Now let's look at something that's unique about the PrusaSlicer. I'm going to actually close this window on the side that gives you details about what you've selected. I'm going to rotate this back up, make it a little bigger. What if we wanted the boots on our astronaut to print in a different color? Well, you might say you need a two-color printer like an IDEX printer. You don't. This sign here was printed in two colors on a Prusa printer. And it could have been printed on a Creality printer or on an Flsun printer. And the way it works is really very simple. It's like bricks. You've probably all seen a house where maybe it's white brick, and then perhaps there's a red row going all the way around. Or perhaps around the windows, the brick is a little different. Well, 3D printers work the same way as laying brick. You lay down a layer of white, lay down another layer of white. Then you go over to the printer, you stop it, you change the filament to red, you let print a layer of red. You stop it, you change the filament to white, and you continue printing. You could do that all manually, but PrusaSlicer makes it easy to produce items like these. So what I'm going to go here is over to preview mode, and I'm going to move this control down until I'm just above the shoes. And then see this little plus sign? I'm going to click the plus sign. What that says is that the slicer should now inject a command into the print stream to tell the printer, pause so I can change the filament. And specifically a command to pause for changing the filament. How does it know what command to insert? Well, if I go to printer settings here, and I go to custom G-code, then I scroll down, you'll see there's an option here called color change G-code. And the command it's going to send out is an M600. In current versions of Marlin, Marlin version 2.0, and a little later versions of the 1.x thread of Marlin, there's a command that some printers support. The M600 command will cause your printer to stop printing when it completes a layer, to move the printhead up and off to the side, to automatically eject the current filament, and wait for you to load new filament to continue, and then to press a continue button on the screen of your 3D printer. Now, not all printers support that. Some printers only support the G-code pause command or the stop command. Well, you could change this command here to whatever is appropriate for your printer. So you can use this feature of Prusa with pretty much any FDM style printer today. And in fact, as I indicated, that's how I print signs like this. I tell it to pause where the letters that are raised start. I change the filament and I continue printing. Now I want to show you one more feature in Prusa that I use often. So we're going to load in our model rocket. And you'll see it loads in nicely here on the screen. But we're going to select the rocket and go over here to scale. And then I'm going to turn the side display back on because I want to type in the scale. And we're going to set this to 250%. And you'll notice here that I have an error. The error is that this rocket, the very tip here, is above the top of my model. So it won't fit on this printer. So how do I print it? I could print it smaller, but I want to print it big. Well, there's a wonderful feature in the PrusaSlicer. I can click on this item on the side called Cut. Then I can move this plane up and down. So we're going to move it down so it's just on top of the fins here. I'm going to say Perform Cut, and it will cut the model into multiple pieces and arrange the multiple pieces on my print bed. So I'm a big fan of the PrusaSlicer. I think that if I spent more time with it, I would be as comfortable as I am with Cura. It definitely produces very high quality prints. The prints complete in about 20% less time. And it's just organized a bit different. However, if you go to add a printer, there are only about 8 or 10 manufacturers represented, while there might be 100 on Cura. Now let's go to our next slicer and look at unique capabilities of IdeaMaker. Now, IdeaMaker uses a third organization. Things look a little different. And we're going to start with IdeaMaker. And you'll notice it's configured for the Artist D Pro. We're going to start with IdeaMaker by loading in a multicolor model. We're going to load in this model. Now, when you have a multicolor model like this, you have two STL files, two three-dimensional files that you need to merge together. So I'm going to click on Import Models, and I'm going to select my two dragons here. And you'll see two models have loaded, the scales and the body. Now I can click on the body, and you'll see here immediately I have an option to select an extruder, right or left. We'll click on right for the body. That's going to print it in white, which will look like this. And we'll click on left for the scales. But I don't want to print them separately. I don't want to be gluing these scales onto this body. So in IdeaMaker, I can do a shift click and select both those items, then right click and say Align Selected Models. And it will align them on the same origin, align them so they'll print properly. So I am all set to print this in two colors. Now, if I want to fine-tune the parameters in IdeaMaker, you do it a little differently. The icon they chose I think is terrible, but you actually click on the play icon, and then you have the ability to put different filaments in the two different extruders, and you have this template. The template is where all of the settings are in IdeaMaker. I'm going to click on the gear here, and now we'll see the same types of settings that you saw in Cura and in Prusa. They're organized a little different. In some ways, this might be the best organization because you can see all the categories easily exposed and just go right to those individual categories. So I could change infill density here to 20% as an example. Now, IdeaMaker has one other capability that's really unique to it as far as I've seen so far, and that is that when you go to select the G-code are the commands you send to your printer. Before you start an actual print job, printing what you want to print, you send some setup commands to your printer. That's called the start code. And most slicers, Cura as an example, has one set of G-code for a printer. So if I'm using my JGMaker IRSD IDEX dual extruder printer, sometimes in dual extruder mode, sometimes in single extruder mode, I'd have to send the same G-code both times. Now, why is that a problem? Well, if I have filament loaded into both extruders, but I'm only using one at a given time, I don't want to heat up the other one. So if my start code heats up both extruders, filament's going to drip from that extruder I'm not using. I don't want that. So I'd set it up for one extruder versus two extruders. Very nice feature. Another reason why IdeaMaker is clearly designed for IDEX 3D printers. Now, in addition, let me show you one other example here. I'm going to delete our dragon here. Oops, I have to delete both of those models. And now I'm going to load Phil back in here. Now, in order for his backpack to print properly, we probably need supports under it because you can't print in just the air without something holding it up. So let's go to our parameter settings, to our template here, and let's select the item called support. And we're going to say generate supports automatically, pretty much a standard feature available in all slicers today. And you'll see here that we can select the extruder that we're using for the supports. And when we go out here and we click on fill, we'll see that Phil is using the left extruder. So now let's slice this model. And slicing is a bit slower on IdeaMaker. And go to preview. And preview works. It works well. It's just not quite as beautiful, perhaps, as some of the other slicers. We can scroll down here and we can rotate this model, and you'll see our infill here. But what you'll also see is that supports were added. And they're in the color here that indicates their support, so we can turn on viewing them or view them again. But let's change this to show us extruder color. So you'll see the model is all printed with one extruder and the supports are printed with another. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, as I shared earlier, you do that if you have an intricate model and you want to use dissolvable supports. Those are supports that dissolve in water. So it's a very, very nice feature in IdeaMaker. IdeaMaker has one more feature that I think you'll find interesting. And let's load in our rocket model now. Very quickly here. And we can take our model, select the model, and right-click on it and click on Texture. And we can apply a custom texture. What is a custom texture? Well, this rocket was printed smooth. This rocket was printed with a texture that's been applied to the outside. To apply a texture, the easiest way is click on More and say Import from the IdeaMaker library. It's going to go out to your browser and you're going to see a whole bunch of different textures that you could apply to this model. Let me select Snowflake here. I'll say Import to IdeaMaker. You click on Copy here. Then you return to your IdeaMaker slicer. You click on Download. Successfully download. Next. Use this texture. And now if we blow this up, it's a little bit hard to see here, but you'll see there's a texture applied to this rocket. So very, very nice feature. Now let's wrap this up. I demonstrated some features of 3 different slicers. At the end of the day, for most of the things you're printing, any of them would have worked. For an IDEX print, independent dual extruder, you can do this on all 3 slicers. I find that IdeaMaker is easiest. For multicolor prints, I find that Prusa is easiest. Once again, there are ways to do multicolor prints like this on any of these slicers, but I find Prusa is easiest. In terms of quality, well, Prusa and Cura are very, very similar. IdeaMaker probably trails a little bit. IdeaMaker does have this unique ability to print textured items, to apply a texture to a model that you didn't create. Well, folks, I hope this gave you some insights into these various 3D printer slicers. And I hope that you consider the idea of using multiple tools. One hammer isn't correct for all jobs. If you liked this video, please share it with your friends. Click on the bell to be notified when new videos come out. Subscribe to the channel and give it a thumbs up so YouTube will show this video to more people. Thanks a lot, and let's continue to learn things together.